Hey, what's up, VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel. Well, this time we're going to do a basically a non-metal update. This will be just kind of miscellaneous vinyl that I've been spinning over the last few weeks, maybe few months. Start off with this. This has been in heavy rotation pretty much for the last year. I guess it's been out for about a year now, maybe a little bit longer. Had I done a non-metal best of video, this probably would have been number 1 or number 2 for last year. And I actually considered putting it in my hard rock and heavy metal best of. It just didn't meet that requirement like some of their earlier stuff did. I love everything about this album, but this is Eat the Elephant from A Perfect Circle, which is, of course, one of the side projects from Maynard Keenan from Tool. Really killer album, though. Highly recommend checking that one out. I think it was definitely, it was one of the best albums of the year last year. It would have been in my top 5 for last year. Next up, this is one I ran across for relatively cheap. I had heard all this material before. I was actually surprised that this was done by the Hendrix family and that they were able to get the rights to this. But this is You Can't Use My Name, the RSVP, PPX Sessions, Curtis Knight and the Squires. So Hendrix, before going solo, played for a number of bands. Curtis Knight was one of them. The story behind it is that Jimi Hendrix playing is so good that people began coming to the show to see Jimi Hendrix as opposed to Curtis Knight. And some really good guitar playing. It's not great. There was better stuff coming out during the period, music-wise. It's still cool to listen to some earlier music from Jimi Hendrix, though. And I picked it up for like $10, so I mean, it was definitely worth that just for the Jimi Hendrix collection. Next up, I've talked about this particular guitar player, and actually let me pull something else out too. I'll hit it all at once. See if I can find it. Alright, so we got that one and that one. So these are all three related. But this first one is A Hard Road, John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. This was the Blues Breakers album that he did with Peter Green. I've talked about Peter Green quite extensively over the years. Considered by many to be one of, if not the best, British blues guitar players. He was really looked up to by everybody in that community, even Eric Clapton, who he replaced in the Blues Breakers, and then who eventually replaced him again. And what's also cool about this band is 3 of the 4 members would go on to be, is it 3 of the 4? Peter Green, John McVie. I'm sorry, 2 of the, basically 2 of the founding members of Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Or Peter Green and the Fleetwood Mac. I can't remember what the exact original name was. But you had John Mayall, Peter Green on guitar, John McVie on bass, and Ansley Dunbar on drums. I can't remember. Did Ansley? I can't remember. Regardless, really, really killer album. I don't have it here. It's in my stuff that I haven't really spun yet. I bought this. This is the Sundays reissue from 2011, which sounds amazing. And then about a month after I bought this, I ran across a really nice original pressing. So I've got an original pressing of this as well. So really good, though. Really killer British blues. Then along with that, we've got John Mayall's Blues Breakers Live in 67 Volume 2. Okay, here we go. This was the one I was thinking of where you've got 3 of the early Fleetwood Mac members. So you got John Mayall, Peter Green, John McVie, and Mick Fleetwood. So, this I would say is for huge Peter Green fans, or huge John Mayall Blues Breakers fans only. It's not very good quality. There's times when it's kind of hard to get to, or kind of hard to hear everything. It's pretty low quality. So I don't know that I'd recommend going out and grabbing this one unless you're just like an absolute fan of the Blues Breakers or Peter Green. And then here, I showed this briefly on the video where I talked about my record scores from my last trip to Phoenix. This is one of them I was really excited to get. This is Peter Green, In the Skies. Now, a side note on this, although Peter Green gets a lot of credit on here, he wasn't doing a lot of writing at this point. By this time, he was very deep into his schizophrenia. Things were really bad during the late 70s and early 80s. Actually, most of the lyrics here were written by his wife at the time. I can't remember her first name, but it's on here. It's listed as J.S. Green. She ended up leaving him shortly after this because she couldn't deal with the schizophrenia. And what really makes this stand out is Snowy White, who had left Thin Lizzy and was playing with Peter Green. I think he actually wrote most of this, and I think he was doing most of the playing on here. All the leads, I would pretty much guarantee, were Snowy White on here. That being said, this is a phenomenal album. There's only a few songs with lyrics. A lot of this is instrumental, and it's just top notch. Even Peter Green just playing rhythm with Snowy White, it's really a must-have. Great album. Let's see what else we got. So I've been, I don't know if I've talked about this before. So years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I ran across all of the Smiths albums. And they were all promo copies or gold stamp promos, and they were all mint condition. They looked unplayed. I paid like 10 or 12 bucks a piece for them. I played them, and I just didn't get it. It wasn't for me. I ended up selling them, and because they were gold stamp promos and the Smiths are the Smiths, I think I sold them for like 30 or 40 bucks a piece. So I made a good profit. And then I ran across a CD because there were 1 or 2 songs that I really liked from them. So I grabbed a Greatest Hits CD from somewhere, and over time, I just really started to get the Smiths, and I really started to like it. And then I was upset that I sold those beautiful pressings. Well, one of them that I sold was this comp. This is Louder Than Bombs. I don't remember exactly what the deal is with this. I believe it was a collection of B-sides and unreleased material. Regardless, I was really happy to find this. It's in excellent condition. Not as nice as the original copy that I had. So I've been slowly picking up the Smith stuff. Now, I've heard some stuff from Morrissey's solo career that I like. Not to the point where I'm out searching for his stuff yet. But I'm definitely really digging the Smiths and really happy to have run across a few albums that I have. There may be some other ones in here too. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I know the day I bought this, I bought like I ran across 3 other Smiths albums at the same time. Next up, this one was a shock for me. I have to thank Scott Waters for this because I actually flipped right by this without even realizing what it was. But this is Lightning Strikes Twice from Molly Hatchet. This is one of the harder ones to find on vinyl. This is from '89. Really, I really love this album. It's just, I mean, it's Molly Hatchet. You really can't go wrong with any of their stuff. And actually, they just announced that they have a double live coming out now that was it Danny Joe Brown that just died recently, I believe. So that may be the last release from Molly Hatchet, unless they decide to get a third singer, I guess. Next up, man. So this album, I was a huge Doors fan in my college age years. I wasn't in college at that time, but during that period, you know, probably 17 to about 24, I got real heavily into the Doors. One of my girlfriend's best friend's boyfriend was a huge Doors fan. He's the one that introduced me to him. And like I said, I got real deep into him. I was a real big fan of Jim Morrison. And then something happened where I just kind of lost interest. And, you know, I picked up a couple of the Doors albums here and there. And the only one that stayed in my collection is People Are Strange. And that's always been my favorite Doors album. So, anyway, I ran across this for a good price. I ended up buying it because I was going to trade it. So one of my local record shop owners is a huge Doors fan. It's one of his all-time favorite bands. He actually saw him live a bunch of times. He's got a signed Judas Priest, a signed Iron Maiden album that I've been trying to buy off of him for years. And I know he was looking for this, so I bought this hoping that I could trade. And like I said, I got this for a really good price. But this is the Doors debut album. This is the Mo-Fi. So unfortunately, I brought it to him to trade, and he had just took one in as part of a collection. So he had a copy in his collection already. So I was ultimately disappointed. But then I got home, and after listening to this 2 or 3 times, I forgot how great this album is. It's just phenomenal. And this Mo-Fi pressing sounds absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's dead quiet. Phenomenal. You run across this Mo-Fi pressing, I can't recommend it enough. Next up, again, I've shown this one a couple times. I just pulled this out to give it a spin. This is Dwayne Allman, an anthology. This is a lot of the stuff that he did in studio sessions with other people. So you've got some covers too. Hey Jude, Road of Love. Let's see, Statesboro Blues. So you got a little bit of it kind of covers a little bit of everything in here. There's Layla is on here, which of course he did the solos on. Just a really nice cover of some of the jazz fusion stuff, some of the blues stuff that he recorded as a session artist and as a member of the Muscle Shoals team. Really good, definitely worth having. There's an anthology too that came out a few years after this that I actually just picked up. I picked it up off of Discogs in mint condition for $10. I was shocked to find it for that cheap, but there you go. Next up, this is from the last record store day. This is an album that I was completely disappointed by. This is Bowie Now. I don't know what I was expecting from this album. This was a comp that was released as a promo only back in the 70s. Was it 70s? Yeah, this had to be the early 70s. I'm sorry, mid 70s. This is basically a comp of stuff released from the Heroes album and deeper tracks from Heroes and deeper tracks from Lodger, if I remember correctly. When I first heard about this, I thought it was going to be different versions. It's just the album versions of the song. So for me, it was a complete waste of money. I love Bowie. I don't feel like I have to have every comp, every little side thing that he ever released. There's just too much. I'm happy with his studio albums that, I've been buying the box sets as I run across them for good prices. This was a waste of money. Not one that I recommend at all. Unless you're just an absolute Bowie completist. But I would think if you were the absolute Bowie completist, you would want the original from the 70s, the original comp. So, next up, Operation Ivy. Again, this is one I bought in Phoenix. I've been playing this a lot. This was one of my favorite albums in 91 or 92. Definitely one of the most, probably the most important punk album post 1985. This opened up punk to a whole new, created a whole new genre, really. This is a band that took hardcore punk and mixed it with ska. And I know now that doesn't seem like much of a novelty. Everybody was doing it in the 90s. This was the band that created that sound. Not just that, their stories, their songwriting was absolutely phenomenal. There's not a bad song on here. And some of these, songs like Knowledge and Sound System, Take Warning, Bombshell. The list just goes on and on. This album is phenomenal. And this is actually, so the band had an LP and an EP, and this album puts both of those together. This is a must-have if you're into punk. It just is an amazing, amazing album. And the core of this band, Tim Armstrong and I think it was Matt Freeman, would go on to become Rancid, which was one of the bigger bands of the '90s punk movement. Next up, here we go. This is a really nice pickup. This is a really nice original stereo pressing on Atco. I picked this up for really cheap, and it's pretty much in mint condition. I was really shocked. I thought this was a repress, but this is Disraeli gears from Cream. I am not the biggest Eric Clapton fan. I never have been. I do love the stuff that he did with Cream, though, and this album was just absolutely phenomenal. And the copy that I have an original pressing of this that's just beat to shit that I picked up probably at like a Goodwill or something for $1. So it's really nice to have a nice upgrade for that. Let's mix it up a little bit here. A little bit of hip hop. I was on a Kendrick Lamar kick. Actually, I have a couple. What else do I have of his? I got on a Kendrick Lamar kick last week and pulled these out. So this is kind of a cool reissue of this. They did the normal pressing of Damn, and then last year they did this limited edition pressing. I don't know how limited it is because mine is numbered 28,613. So there's at least 30,000 of them. But what's cool about this is, so they gave it a different cover, and I can't remember. I want to say it's on clear vinyl. I can't remember off the top of my head, though. But what they did that's kind of interesting about this, and I didn't realize this until a friend of mine was playing it in the car, and the sound, the order of the songs was weird. So on this album, they flipped the tracks. So this was actually the final track on the original release, and this was the first track. So they reversed them. So it's kind of funny because I got used to listening to this version of it, and I was really thrown off when a friend was playing it in their car. It is a phenomenal album, though. I'm not a huge fan of modern rap. It just does nothing for me. The lyrics are not substantive at all in most rappers' lyrics. I'm very much into 90s hip hop. I mean, go figure. That's when I was growing up. I should say, late 80s to late 90s is the era that I really enjoy. And he very much harkens back to that era. And then me being from Phoenix, in one of the worst neighborhoods in Phoenix, and growing up there, I very much grew up on West Coast rap, and he very much embodies that as well. So, killer album. If you're into hip hop at all, highly recommend checking this one out. And then after that, I ended up pulling out To Pimp a Butterfly and spinning that one as well. He doesn't have a bad album. He doesn't have a bad track. I recommend picking up all of his stuff. Next up, after that, I ended up pulling this out. Hadn't listened to this for a long time. When this first came out, I played this nonstop. But this is an original pressing of Illmatic from Nas. So I gave that a couple spins as well. Let's see where we're at. 18 minutes. Next up, we'll do a little bit of Roger Waters. I should have put these in order. Oh, you know what? I did. I also listened to Good Kid, Mad City. Sorry. From Kendrick Lamar as well. Next up, I got these from each about a week apart. I'm always on a Pink Floyd kick, and I realized I didn't have much Roger Waters. I saw this pop up on Facebook. Somebody was selling it for like $8-10, so I grabbed it. This is Radio Chaos from Roger Waters. And then I also ended up grabbing this. Is This the Life We Really Want? This album is a funny one for me. I kind of love it and hate it at the same time. I'm not a fan of his politics at all. I hate listening to him talk about what it's like for the poor when he has been extremely rich since the early 70s. He waxes poetic about what it's like to struggle, and he has no idea. It just drives me crazy. That being said, musically, I think he's phenomenal. And a number of these songs, I really like the message, but then he'll interject something that just shows you he has no idea what he's talking about. That being said, I still enjoy the album. I don't know what it is. It's still got enough of that Pink Floyd sound that it pulls me in, and I end up listening to it over and over again. It just has that effect on me, I guess. And then, so speaking of Pink Floyd, I've mentioned this before. As I run across them, I don't think I've bought any of these new, but as I run across the Pink Floyd reissues, I grab them. This is the most recent one I grabbed was Atom Heart Mother. I've actually never owned this one on vinyl in any form before. I've only had it on CD. So I was really glad to get this one on vinyl. This was the first one. Actually, this one I did buy new. This was the only one, though. This is my favorite Pink Floyd album, but this is Animals. So I've given that 3 or 4 spins. And then last but not least, I pick up The Wall. This one was used as well. I don't think I need to talk about those too much. Next up, this album is amazing. I've talked about this band a number of times before. Their debut album is my favorite album of the 90s. I have a tattoo on my shoulder of Jesus that was drawn by the singer of this band, and it was on the insert of that album from the 90s. This is Mad Season live at the Moore Theater. The Moore Theater is right down the road from the famous Fish Market in Seattle. Very famous theater. Jimi Hendrix played there. I saw the Super Suckers there. I mean, Nirvana, Alice in Chains. I mean, this place is steeped in musical history from that region. And this show is amazing. Lane Staley sounds phenomenal. What's cool about this too is they don't play the songs exactly the same. There's a couple songs where they've sped them up a little bit, just a tiny bit, which is normal. If you've ever done live performances before, when you kind of get into that groove, you tend to play songs a little bit faster. But it's cool to hear them played slightly different. And I mean, Lane Staley just steep in his addiction, which is, I hate to say what I love about him, but that darkness that you could feel coming from his soul just always comes through in the music, and you hear it here. It's so good. The guitar playing is phenomenal. I've talked about this before. If you were to take Alice in Chains and mix it with Pink Floyd, that's kind of what you get here. The guitar playing has always reminded me of David Gilmour on these albums. Highly recommend checking that out if you haven't checked out Mad Season. That's either their album above or this. You can't go wrong. Speaking of the Moore Theater and Jimi Hendrix, this is Both Sides of the Sky. This was the third of the last 3 albums released by the Hendrix family that had unreleased material. That's not 100% true. There's been hundreds of bootleg albums, hundreds of comps over the years before the Hendrix family took the rights back to the music that have been released. So most of this stuff I have heard in one way or another. It's just really nice to have it here in this really nice, super clean sounding pressing. Some real standouts here that I love having on here are Sweet Angel. Cherokee Mist is a song that I've always loved. You've got Manish Boy, Lover Man, Hear My Train A-Comin'. What I like about these is they're not filled with the songs that you hear every day from Jimi Hendrix. And all 3 of these comps have been really good. This one is the Barnes & Noble exclusive. It was on purple vinyl, which is very fitting. Sounds amazing, though. Pulled out a little bit of Zeppelin. I'm not going to go into them too much. Was that the only one? Yeah. So pulled out Zeppelin 3. I love this album. This is one of the special editions that came with the additional record. I refused to buy these when they came out. They were going for $35, some of them $45. So I bought the CDs instead, which I have. As I run across these used, I pick them up. I've got 3 or 4 of them now. The only one that I think is a must-have is Zeppelin 1 because it's got the live album that was previously only available as a bootleg, a really bad quality bootleg as well. This one, the companion disc is good. It's not great. What I like about it's the instrumental versions of the songs that are on here. This album has also always been, you know, when they talk about albums with where the B-sides or side 2 is better than side 1, this is always one of the top ones on that list for me. But Led Zeppelin 3. Let's see. I don't know if I'm going to show everything here. Let's talk about this one. She's been all over the media, all over the news, and I think for good reason. I really like her. I think she just turned 18. She's very young. It's her and her brother that write everything. But this is, what's it called? When We Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? From Billie Eilish. I really dig her music. At least this album. I haven't heard the EPs that came out before this. This is her first official release. And I was really shocked by how good this is. Her brother is an amazing producer. He does all of the guitar playing, all of the drums, all of the electronics is done by him, and he co-writes the songs with her. And her delivery and the way she sings is just it's very different than anything else in pop right now. Which is funny because now people are starting to copy it, which, you know, it's just pop music, but really good. Really worth checking out if you haven't checked her out yet. In the background, it's not this album, but we are listening to Rory Gallagher. I've talked about him ad nauseum over the years. For the last 2 years, I've been on a huge Rory Gallagher kick. I've actually got like 5 or 6 of his CDs on my desk right now. This is Stage Struck, recorded live. I like all of his stuff, but his live stuff is really the best. That's what. And in the background, we're listening to one of my favorite performances of him. This is Irish Tour. This was 73, I believe. Thought I had set it on here. Sorry, allergies are really bad today. I've talked about him a lot. Rory Gallagher, although most of you have not heard of him, the guys, the guitar heroes of many, really looked up to this guy. So Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Tony Iommi. They've all talked about how this is a guy that they really looked up to and who really influenced them. And what's funny about that is he was younger than all of them. I think he was 17 in '69 when the first Taste album came out, which was his band, and he wrote most of the music. They were all blown away by him and really looked up to him. And he's amazing. Anything by Rory Gallagher, I recommend grabbing. So again, this is what we're listening to in the background. Pulled this one out, or I should say pulled out. I grabbed this one about a year ago. Finally got around to spinning it. Really good. This is really good. I just saw Deep Purple last year, and this is not very different than the set list that they played last year. But they hit all the strong points. This was I want to say 86 or 87. This live show, but this is Deep Purple. Nobody's Perfect. This is actually a it's not a white label promo, but it's got the normal rainbow Columbia label. Is it Columbia? I mean the Mercury, the regular Mercury label, but underneath it says for promotional use only, whatever. But really good. I don't know if it's a live set. Really good set of live performances. I don't know exactly how many shows that came from. Speaking of punk, another band that I've talked about before. These guys are absolutely amazing. I would say this is the best modern punk band by leaps and bounds. Even their newest album, which is my least favorite, is still a really good album. But this album is absolutely amazing. This is White Crosses by Against Me. The songwriting on here is top notch, And I Was a Teenage Anarchist is one of the best punk songs of all time. I don't care what anybody says. They do have a little bit of a pop edge to them, which for that song works perfectly. Just highly recommend checking this album out and checking out, actually listening to the song A Teenage Anarchist, because anarchy is about not having rules. And the singer talks about how it's amazing how many rules there were when she was an anarchist. At the time, I can't remember, it was after this album. The singer has since had a sex change. Sex change? No. Has come out as trans. I'm sorry. I don't think she's had a sex change. This is prior to that, though. It was after this album, and they really became famous that she announced that she was trans. Amazing, amazing album. Next up, from the same vein, the Gaslight Anthem had a similar sound to Against Me. This is the 59 Sound Sessions. I've talked about the 59 Sound, another amazing punk album. What was really cool about the 59 Sound is it's kind of a mix of Social Distortion and Bruce Springsteen. I'm not a huge fan of Bruce Springsteen, but the way they mix it with punk here is beautiful. And this is just kind of leftover tracks that ended up being B-sides or that didn't make the album. Unfortunately, the Gaslight Anthem never put out a good album again. They've had like 3 albums come out since this. I haven't liked any of them. You know, it's just one of those bands that kind of peaked early and they just never got that magic back again. Oh, let's see. Most of the rest of this we can... this is going to be a lot longer than I expected. Next up, we got David Bowie, Heathen. So I hear a lot of people talk about his new sound and how amazing that his last album was. That wasn't really a new sound, though. He really started it with this album right here. What was this? 2002. I didn't realize it was that long ago. I thought this was 2005. That sound, kind of a mix of his 70s Berlin era and kind of the modern sound Bowie, really started on Heathen. And actually, even the imagery, you look at his eyes here, and it's very reminiscent of what he would release as in Black Star, sorry. Amazing album. Another one I highly recommend picking up. This was done by Friday Music. For a while there, Friday Music was making their albums longer than any other record by like a 1/4 inch, and it pisses me off because it doesn't fit into any of the nice record sleeves. They've stopped doing that, thankfully, but it kind of sucks that all of these Bowie albums that they did beautiful repressings of don't fit into sleeves. These were some of the limited, I think it was Barnes & Noble that they did these through, but this one is like marbled black and white. Regardless, amazing album. If you liked Black Star, I would recommend also checking out Heathen. Next up, pulled out a little bit of Sublime. Was it just that one? Yeah. Actually, speaking of Bowie, before I go to Sublime, also pulled this out. I kicked myself. 5 or 6 years ago, I ran across an original pressing of this for $10 and passed it up, even knowing that they sold for $20 or $30 at the time. And I haven't found an original pressing since. Well, they finally repressed it last year, the year before, 2017, so the year before last. So I grabbed it. This is still one of my all-time favorite movies. I've always loved the soundtrack of this. This is Labyrinth from David Bowie. I would still like to find an original pressing because this one does not sound amazing. They didn't do a really good job of mastering this. It's still nice to have, but I have heard the original pressing, and the original pressing sounds much better. So back to Sublime. I've heard a lot of different stories about this album. I've heard that it was just a hodgepodge of stuff that they put together to shop to the labels. I've heard that it was just Bradley experimenting, which the more I've listened to this over the years, and I bought this the day it was released, or the day it got a major label release. I had never heard the original prior. I'm kind of leaning towards the latter. He was definitely experimenting here, and if you're familiar with the music that he was into, it kind of makes more sense that way. But this was Robin in the Hood, and there's some phenomenal stuff on here. There's also a lot of throwaway. Like I said, he was experimenting. The original version of Pool Shark is phenomenal. Saw Red sees the introduction to the world, really, of Gwen Stefani from No Doubt. This came out quite a while before No Doubt blew up. Boss DJ is on. I mean, there's some really killer songs that would be redone for later albums slightly differently. A must-have, though, if you're a fan of Sublime. Also from the 90s, we got Singles. Finally grabbed a copy of this on vinyl. This has some of my all-time, I mean, Alice in Chains. I'm a huge fan of Mother Love Bone. Soundgarden. Who else was on here? We had Smashing Pumpkins. There was somebody else. And I can't remember. Paul Westerberg. And now I can't remember what band he was from. This was his first foray into solo. It's not going to come to me right now. But what's really cool about this isn't even the Singles album. We've all heard these songs for years. What I really dig about this is the expanded CD that came with it, which of course has the Pontier tracks, which they got a record store day release within the last year or two. The Pontier tracks are what's his name? Is it Dylan? One of the characters in here was chopping around a demo, and his name in the film was Pontier, and it was early cuts of some of the Soundgarden songs. You've got early cuts of Spoon Man. Just really cool stuff. That was on the CD, and then there's some B-sides that never made the album as well. Really cool package. If you find it with the CD, it's definitely worth grabbing. And then some other stuff that I've pulled out and listened to recently. Albert King, Born Under a Bad Sign. Love this album. This is not the record store day release. This is the Sundays pressing from, I want to say, the late 90s, early 2000s. Really nice pressing, though. Pulled out some April Wine. What was that one? Walking Through Fire. This is not my favorite. At this point, this is where they kind of lost me, actually. But there's still some good stuff on there. Buckingham Nicks, which I talked about. I was really stoked. This thing sounds phenomenal. It's hard to find this in good condition for a good price. This is not the gatefold version. But this is still, these go for 30, 40 bucks. I think I paid $18 for it. It's not as good as the Fleetwood Mac stuff they did, but still, it's still a great album. And if you're a Fleetwood Mac fan, it's a must-have. Billy Gibbons, I've talked about this quite a bit. His voice is gone, but his guitar playing is just as good as it ever was. And I've shown this. If you saw my room tour, I've actually got a signed copy. I pre-ordered it, and you got the sealed copy, but they gave you a second cover that was signed by Billy Gibbons, which I thought was really cool. Pulled this out, listened to yesterday. This was Smashing Pumpkins, Gish. Just an amazing album. Another one I'd love to find an original pressing of. And then the last great album from Jay-Z, in my opinion, The Blueprint. Actually, maybe the Black Album. I can't remember which came out first. I like the Black Album as well. And then last but not least, I wanted to talk about this one last real quick. So this artist was originally in a band called The Far Side. The Far Side's debut album is one of the top 5 hip-hop albums of all time, in my opinion. Fat Lip was a very big part of that. Fat Lip and Imani were probably the 2 standout rappers from that group, especially in the first album. Unfortunately, Imani changed his voice in the second album, which I'm not going to get into. And then Fat Lip, I believe, left after the second album. But this is the Loneliest Punk. And there's a song called What's Up, Fat Lip that came out. And I saw the video for it. And I absolutely loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. but I couldn't find the album anywhere. CD Now at the time was real big. It was always sold out. I couldn't find it anywhere on the internet. And I was really excited when they finally announced it was going to get repressed for Record Store Day. This album is amazing. One I highly recommend. I recommend checking out the song What's Up Fat Lip. The video for it is phenomenal. When I first heard it, I downloaded it like an MP3 copy of it, or the first copy I had. And it sounded like there was something wrong with the sound. It's got like this kind of morphed, almost like your drunk sound to it. And that's actually the song. The way it was produced is just really cool. And again, lyrically, he's amazing. Just one of the top. That just outside of a small group of underground kids that were really into this stuff, he just never got the credit that was due to him. But phenomenal album. Again, that's it, guys. This went way longer than I expected. I apologize for that, but that's it, VC. Take care. I'll see you soon.